So thank you very much for accepting my invitation for the interview. Ahmed Salah is an Iraqi archaeologist who is working on the site of Nippur, which was once a religious center in the Sumerian times. Maybe gets less attention than Babylon, but we will talk about its importance later. I know Ahmed because I was traveling in Iraq, and he was a wonderful guide to me who was showing me around in Nippur, arranged my permit, and also made me recognize how interesting it is to discover an archaeological place. Because I think an average person doesn't appreciate it that much. Like some pieces of rocks or mainly soil deserted area, and we just not appreciate like a monument. But the way he was talking about it, I realized how interesting his job is and how interesting it is to discover history. Also, at the same time, when I was traveling around in Iraq, I noticed that even Iraqi people are not really aware of their history. We Western people, we know about Babylon, Mesopotamia. These are well-known phrases, but we don't really know what's actually behind. And this is almost all related to Iraq, which is called the cradle of civilization, with thousands, tens of thousands of archaeological sites. And Nippur is just one of where you are working. So that's why I thought it's interesting to talk to somebody who has a close connection to this work and to the history of Iraq. So we say that Iraq is the cradle of civilization, but it sounds like an empty phrase if we don't look behind. So why is that? Why is it the cradle of civilization? What do we owe to Mesopotamia?
Well, thank you so much at the beginning for the invitation, and I'm happy to be here. And I appreciate what you are doing, trying to explore the knowledge about Iraq because it hasn't been hidden, and there are so many reasons for that. Politics, one of them, and answering the question, Iraq is the cradle of civilization because, until now, the recent studies, the recent excavations project showed that the first civilization settlement is like it started in Iraq, in the north, city called Yirmo in Kirkuk, and that's where the seeds of the civilization started. When people started to build houses, started to do farming, started to have the animals they can like they can raise and they can use, not like acting like animals, hunting, hiding in the caves, doing fire. Fire is an invention, but hiding and climbing in the mountain, hiding in the cave, that's not civilization at all. So that's the stage when humanity like jumped forward from hunting and hard life, if we can call it civilized, but something like best than what they had, which is start to build houses and do farming, and then after like many like time after they start to do the writing and stuff, and also like why is Iraq not that well known? For an average person, it's not that well known, but for an archaeologist people, especially who are interested in Near East archaeology, they know how important. But that's something that because that's specialized, they need to study it and they know it. But why do people they don't know about Iraq? I think like one of the reasons or the main reason is politics and wars and the situation that Iraq have been living in for the 100 years ago. Revolution, wars, complex, inside complex, war with, I don't know, with anyone, anyone with love. I don't know why. And that's the archaeological site. They are, as you know, they are buried under the ground and they need to be buried. And the people who they need to be and to come need like a safe environment to excavate. And if you are trying to travel to a country who have been in the war for 8 years with Iran, and the invasion of Kuwait, the war with America, and after the ISIS invasion, this is not a nice environment for anyone to travel. Imagine if, like Faisal and stuff, when they're trying to come from Europe to stay there for like for 4 seasons, 4 years, 5 years, that's almost impossible. So I think that's one of the reasons that Iraq have not been in the spotlight. And that's when another civilization used this to put themselves into the spotlight. And that's the right, like, I mean, government should do that, especially for the ecological side. It's like, it's an investment after all. Tools come to you from around the world. You have to use this and you have to use it in the best way. But we didn't because, as you know, as I said, the politics, the previous government, Saddam Hussein, conflicts, so that the environment was not as safe to excavate. But what we did in that time, we depended on the local archaeologists, the Iraqi ones, the professor and the doctor that we have in our university, like Baghdad University, Mosul, Qadisiyah. So we depended on our own, and I think they did a good job. And you can't even compare between the Iraqi excavation, the Italian excavation, the German group, and each school way. Like even between them, I mean, for me, I visited the Ur maybe 5 years ago, again, more excavation in Ur, and we were surprised because they never used paper during excavation. I mean, you have to use during the excavation, especially when you're on the site, because you need to document, you need to do database, you need to draw. Everything
Sorry
you
to
find.
stop you, but you were touching so many topics that I want to ask. You said the last period didn't permit the excavations to really be developed because you need a safe environment and there was no chance,
Yeah,
which is understandable. But during
yeah,
Saddam Hussein, actually, there were big reconstructions, even if they are criticized, but Babylon was reconstructed. Other sites, no, he gave priority to that. So that time there were some works. Afterwards, of course, the wars stopped all that. But for a few years, ISIS is gone and there is a relative peace in Iraq. Is there a progress in archaeological work now in your country?
yeah, of course. And back to what you said about Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein's construction and reconstruction in Babylon was not a scientific reconstruction. They ruined Babylon.
Yeah.
And that's why the UNESCO, because he did it as a, like, he felt like he belonged to these species, the, the Akkadian Empire, the Ashurian Empire, and he needed to put his print on Babylon. That's why you can find, I think you can find the Mudvik and in Babylon stamped with Saddam Hussein name. And that's completely wrong. Scientific reconstruction shouldn't be like this. It's called scientific. That's not scientific. I mean, they brought shovels and trucks into the archaeological site, which is really unacceptable. That will ruin the site, not help the control.
And Babylon is the
Now,
most famous Mesopotamian city. It was the largest, the most developed, like a sample city for later civilizations. The one that I think every foreigners know the best because of the Hanging Garden, the Tower of Babel, the Code of Law of Hammurabi. And so what do we see actually when we go to Babylon? Out of all these ancient places, do we see anything?
nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing back to that period. And if everything you see there now, some things have been made in the 90s. Nothing belongs to Babylon. When I was doing my excavation, let's not mention names, but one of the good university in the European Union, we are doing our excavation in an A student, BA student, PhD student also, and they were dying to visit Babylon because, as you said, Babylon is the most famous city in the world. And the professor said, like, that's exactly what she said. You don't need to because you studied Babylon and you have this beautiful image about Babylon in your mind. If you go now and you visit Babylon, you will be so disappointed because you can't find anything that you already seen in the books, you already read about in the book. So just with this, keep this nice image about Babylon in your mind and don't ruin it because now it's not Babylon. I mean, even the break they use for the reconstruction, it's not the same the bread that they use, like a modern one. Anyone can buy it and use it in the house, and that's not acceptable at all. So, but The other question about ISIS and when ISIS is gone now, I think we are doing a good job, especially the south part of Iraq was not affected by ISIS stuff. But yeah, as I said, so regarding what ISIS did in the north, especially Mosul, because they took it as their capital, I think now things getting very well. And as I said, group excavating in the north, especially in Mosul, and that's mean things getting very well, I think back to normal, and it's a safe environment again for the people to excavate, which is also good because Mosul was also the capital of the Assyrian Empire. It's very important city for archaeologists. And I
What
think
damage was caused by ISIS? Which archaeological sites were victim to the Islamic Caliphate destruction?
okay, I don't think they damaged that much because first of all, they break everything they found in the Mosul Museum. They found there it was not the original pieces; they were copies. So they destroyed the contain many architecture stuff, but they were all like copies. But I believe they destroyed one of the walls for for Ashur, which is also in Mosul. For the Ashur, like it's the capital of the Assyrian Empire, and the thing is located inside the city. It's also that's also wrong. And also they I believe they destroyed one of the Lamaso. Lamaso is the imagination feature you see in the Assyrian Empire, the wing of the animal, the head of the human, which is something magnificent. But also these things taken care now by a German expedition for excavation, and they are collecting pieces and they'll try to put it together again in the future, which is work because that's what they did with the Gate of Babylon, which is now in Berlin Museum. They also cut it to pieces and they collected them. So I think it's full work, and they didn't did that much of damage.
But do you think it can be fully reconstructed? What they destroyed?
Definitely. As I said, for an example, the Gate of Babylon, it was cut into thousands of pieces, and they took it like 5 small boxes from Iraq to Germany to Berlin Museum, and they collected again for small pieces with numbers. And now what they are that's what they are doing also. The German group they are doing this right now in Mosul, and this is the second season now because the previous season was just last year. So doing the same, collecting pieces they didn't remember, and they can put it again together, and everything will be fixed.
That's good news. That it's
Of
not
course.
lost. Already, I think Iraq lost many things during the wars that ended up abroad. It was smuggled. A lot of things. The Iraqi Museum has a story about that. That after the U.S. invasion, it was just looted, and several artifacts were stolen. Some of them were regained, recollected, but many things are lost. So at least this is good news. When you are on the excavation site and you see on the spot a piece of pottery or a bone or something, do you know immediately at the first sight, based on your experience, to which period it dates approximately? Like how old is that? 1,000 years, 2,000?
The archaeologists, you should know, but it's almost impossible that you know each piece of pottery that you find in Iraq, because there's like thousands of sites in Iraq, and you can distinguish each one to which period it returns. But there is like specific their own decoration, their own color, their own style of making pottery, and that you can distinguish. For example, the Sasanian period, they really use the glass pottery with blue to green color, and and they have like more green than the blue. And then the Parthian period, they also have the same pottery type with the same color, but the difference is between the blue and the green. They have a little bit more blue in the paint that they use than the green, so that you can distinguish the early dynastic period because most of the pottery is belong to 5,000 years when it's returned to early dynastic period because so old. So you will find it so green because it has been affected by the water and buried a lot under the ground. So it's returning to a green because it's almost ruined. and like Kasai's big glasses with the red color. You can distinguish these things. But the whole thing, you cannot. That's almost impossible, and that's why we have so many books about pottery, and it contains so many images and so many styles and drawing styles about each period and the pottery that they created in this period. With the rim of the pottery, the handle, the bottom, how thick is the body of the pottery. That's you can use this kind of catalog or this kind of book when you are like confused and you can distinguish. So you can have the pottery or the photo of the pottery or the drawing of the pottery, and you can compare it with the book, and then it will be so easy for you to distinguish. Okay, this has the same style, the same thickness, the same color, so it starts with the same period.
So you have a
It's
big
easy.
library at your disposal, full of books. And when you go back from the site, then you can look it up and compare and identify to which period the
That's
artifact
exactly
belongs.
what I meant. Yeah.
How long is a project normally when you start to work on an excavation site? Is it very different? Sometimes it's only few months, sometimes
Of course,
years.
of course, it depends like how big is the site and for what you're doing the excavation. For example, if there is like some kind of like let's say some kind of construction project and a new airport, they have to came to the SDAH so we can go to see the whole land that they try to do the airport at. And with the maps that we have, we need to see if there is an archaeological site buried inside this land or not, or there's an archaeological site beside this land.
Which in
So it's
Iraq, there is a good chance, right? You
yeah,
find something.
of course, like let's say 80%. You can see farmers and they need to do farming. That's the life they used to. They do farming. Then we'll do some kind of small survey for their land that they try to do the farming at. And then you'll find a small site they don't know about. It's buried. And that means they can't do anything about it. This land will be taken to the government now. And it's also sad. So back to my topic. And so as example, for an airport, if we found one or many archaeological sites inside the land that they try to do the airport at, they have to do one of the two decisions. The project will be cancelled or they need to do an excavation for the whole site. And we have to get to the beginning of the deepest ground when we can reach no civilization more. You know what? Like you can go deeper, 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 and then until you have nothing. And that's we call it tasfir al like close the site because we have nothing left. We took everything out, and now you can do your project. And that's what takes long because these kind of excavations, they need to do the project and they need a clear land. So you have to clear the site, no matter how long does it take, whatever it costs, will take 5, 6, 8 months. I mean, my colleagues, they're having an excavation project now in the deep south in Basra, and this goes for 2 years. And I don't know for what it's for, but also there is something they need to build. And there's like a chain of an archaeological site close to another, and they have to excavate it all. It takes so many times that they take employees from all around Iraq, and it will be years of excavation.
Are there enough
Sometimes
archaeologists in Iraq? I mean, for all this work, make also for constructions, but also there is some historical excavation. Is there enough people who are expert in that in Iraq?
my belief is like for now, I think we can manage this. But for the future, I don't think so. Because as you know, like thank God now we have in a like a time of peace for several years, which brings so many archaeological teams to excavate. But in the future, we have so many sites and to be excavated all, and that takes a lot of people. With the average of the archaeologists that we have right now, that won't be enough. And that's also a problem. Leads us to another problem, which is we don't have that much of students trying to get into the College of Archaeology. And I believe one of the people don't know about the heritage history, and that's the government fault. I don't know if we talked about this before or not. It's not normal from the first grade until university. We don't even have one book talking about the civilization. There is not even one book the student can read. in the school about the civilization. And we are talking about the Iraqi civilization. It contains four civilizations, not even one, like the Akkadian, the Sumerian, the Assyrian, and the Babylonian. And that is something needs so much of work. There is like just a normal history book about the whole Iraqi history, the Islamic period, the modern period, the old period, and it's contained, I don't know, like, let's say maybe 10 pages about the Iraqi civilization.
The children don't learn much about the pre-Islamic period, Mesopotamia, about ancient civilizations.
Almost 0%.
Which is incredible, right? That you say
not normal.
Is the cradle of civilization, and then there is not much emphasis.
It's not normal at all. Yeah, and that's why we can't get that much of students trying to get into the facility of archaeology, the college of archaeology, because they're not interested in it. They don't know about it.
How did you become interested? You also didn't learn much about that. So how did you get into contact?
I loved it when I was a student. I loved mystery. I loved hidden stuff. I needed to excavate. I don't know why. And my story, when I finished high school, I got accepted in the human science college. I didn't accept in archaeology science. I was so mad because of that. But I went to the headmaster at archaeology college and I said, I need to, I came to study archaeology. I don't need human science. I'm an archaeologist. I love my civilization. I have read a lot about it. And also the other civilizations, the Egyptian, and I need to do this. And he's been accepted in this college. It's not our fault, but there is only one way that we can fix it. And the thing is, you can find a student from the facility of archaeology who would like to study human science. So you can exchange with him. He can come, he can go, take your place, and you can come and take his place. And that's what I did. I kept searching for 4 or 3 days for some freshman who would like to study human science, and finally I found one. And I did the exchange, and I started, already they have been doing lecture, and I missed so many lectures, but at least I started archaeology, and I was the best student in my college for the first year. I get it rewarded from the president of the Kurdistan region, Dr. Baham Saleh, and I still also have my idea about because they put me in some program called Wa'adun, which means promising, means people who believe they'll do something in the future. So they have to go into this program, and they took me because I think I did well.
But this is a great story. And I have to mention that how you learned English and how we can talk now, which is not evident in Iraq. Actually, very few people learn English, and you have never been abroad. I'm still impressed by that. You on your own, you decided you want to learn, and you speak better than most foreigners who were studying for long years in school. That's another great thing which helped you to move forward in your career. Now you are getting the scholarship thanks to that, and you can study. So you are an example, I think, for other people also who
Thank you so much.
archaeology.
Yeah, I think it's because when it's related to things that you love to do, and you start to to create stuff for you. Even if, for me, I didn't have any special courses or anything. English, I pumped it for myself because I need it. And when you need, when you have plan and you need to do something, you'll figure a way. You'll find your way. You'll find your path. Doesn't matter how bad it will be, but eventually you'll do it. And as I said, I'm an example, and I think I'm proud of it. And I did very well. And I passed the TOEFL test, the international TOEFL test, and that's how I could get to Italy. Otherwise, I couldn't.
Is there a government initiative now to extend the possibility to study archaeology?
It's been the same since I get into college. It's the same. Even the amount of the people who are trying to get into archaeology department is decreasing. I mean, especially last year, can you imagine there is accepted in the archaeology college, whole stage only 6 people. I mean, if one of them gets coronavirus, the whole class will be dismissed because this is not normal.
Well, then
Because
that's
people not interested in it. People haven't heard anything about it before, so they're not interested.
There are so many important places in Mesopotamia, but we also know Babylon, as we mentioned. But actually, there are other 11 sites like Uruk. When I was there, I read that this is where writing started. I never knew before.
Yeah.
And I saw a board which says, and I was surprised.
Yeah.
I'm standing at the spot where writing started.
Yeah,
From
this
here,
is the spot when writing started. Yeah.
how was writing like that time? Symbols on what they were writing? Can you tell me?
It's basically uniform writing. Before that was symbols, and then it turns into uniform, and then at the Sumerian period, it gets really developed, and then it turned into sentence. And that's why, because the Sumerian language gets really developed and important, and all Akkadian period. That's why people here in Iraq, when they use the Sumerian word, and they don't know that they're using it. They're using it because they heard it, but they don't know it's related to their heritage. For example, I can talk to someone and I ask them about something, and then I say, "Am I right? Mu? Mu means like I'm putting a question mark on the end of the sentence. Mu, when I use it, when someone like I talk to him and I ask him, do you agree with me or not? Mu is not in the basic Arabic language. There is not such a thing called mu. But we Arabic people use it because it came from the Sumerian language. Mu, they use it like a part they can put in English. And also so many words like we can say if we saw like a house it's still building, it's still being reconstructed, it haven't been finished yet. You can say this is a heikel. That means that's how this house hasn't been done yet. And heikel is also a Akkadian word. We have nothing called heikel in Arabic. And there is so many books talks about how Sumerian and Akkadian language affected the Arabic language. And you can find a long list, especially the Akkadian. They are so related to Arabic. I don't know why I'm related to Akkadian because that's the core. But that's how we affected. And
About which period we are talking about when writing started? How many thousands of years ago?
Sumerian, we can say like the early dynastic 5,000, 6,000 years ago BC. That means 8,000 now. And
yeah, what else was invented in Mesopotamia, like apart from writing? What do we use now, which comes from this region?
Like, I mean, we can say, okay, make it simple, except fire. Let's say everything else. Wheel for sure, not maybe. And attempts to create the wheel, and we have it in and also we have the Iraqi National Museum. Real mathematics, writing, the 60-minute timing, the month timing, even one related to drinks and heat. And they invented beer, and that's something interesting because the old Iraqi people, they were not. I don't know why, but they were not interested about water that much. They cared about beer more, and and I think one of the reasons, or the major reasons, especially when like the worker or the man of the house needed to get out, and he need to have something with him to drink and something to eat if you are going to do hard working. So and mainly beers is what they take with them. They take maybe later I show an example of we call it the bubble thimble. A bubble thimble, we can say it's the first attempt to create a disposable plate. A plate you can eat in and then you can throw it away. You don't need to bring it back with you at home. And we have that in the ancient Iraq period. Uh, it's called the Baba Dumbol. It's about the plate, looks like a jar. It's not like a small plate like this. You can put whatever you need with to take it to the place that you are working with. And then when you are finished with it, you don't need to bring it back. You have to throw it away because it's so cheap to make and it's not even that well made. And you'll find it, you can distinguish like it contains so much dirt and you can see also the fingerprints still there. It's like it has been made so fast because they didn't put that much of good care about it because they throw it away. And that's what the people were taking with them when they were going to do their work. Mobile drum balls mean disposable plates and a jar full of beer. And then they'll have the power to do whatever they want. And then we'll cover the whole side with a plastic bag. And then we'll put like let's say 10 centimeter layer of dust to cover the whole thing that we excavate. So it won't be shown because we don't need, otherwise they'll try to dig it again. So we cover that with like say 10 centimeters of dust and then it will be hidden. And then we can come next season, take the small, like the thin layer of dust, plastic back, and then you can see the whole thing in front of you showing. So the fact doesn't matter for like 1 to 5 years, it will be covered with dust. But when you take the dust, you'll find a plastic bag. That means you reached what you have reached before. Take the plastic bag, continue working.
There is another typical structure in ancient Mesopotamia, which is called zikkurat. One of the famous sites is the zikkurat of Ur. Last year, the Pope came for a visit to Iraq, and then you could see on TV. And this is like a landmark of Iraq at the moment.
Yeah. The zikkurat is it's a worship place. It's a worship place that the ancient Iraqi people, they believed the goddess that they believed in. They have a specific time that they land from the sky to the earth. And they believe they need to build a resting place for the goddess, which is called zikkurat. Like it's like a resting station to the time when the gods arrive. And it doesn't matter which one, and Enlil, seeing anyone, when he's trying to get down to earth, he needs to rest. And so they made this high building for him, just a worship place. And at the end of the zikkurat, you'll find a big room, and that's when they used to put the food, the animals. Sometimes even they put women that believe the God you need to so he needs to eat, he needs some meat, some fruit, and a woman to spend time with to be satisfied. Okay, that's what they believe. That's what that's what they said. So they built these places, just a worshiping and a resting place for the God, and it's unique. It's like typical ancient Iraqi design, and also the Zikkurat of Neighbor, which is many people don't know this. Like Zikkurat of Neighbor is also bigger than Zikkurat of Ur, but because it hadn't been reconstructed, and it's still like almost buried. Only the high building, the worship place is shown. So because it hasn't been rebuilt, no one can distinguish that it's bigger than Zikkurat of Ur, but it's bigger.
If it was bigger, Nippur must have been an important place, religious center. What was the significance of Nippur? You can hardly hear about that. Another thing that we know about Nippur is a little bit unknown, but you say that it had an even bigger, and the one in Ur is already impressive. Role of Nippur and in which period it was a significant city?
Nippur survived the whole period. Like it survived the Sumerian period, the Akkadian period, the Babylonian. Like it survived four empires: the Sumerian period, the Babylonian period, the Akkadian period, and at the same time it stayed what it stayed. Like it was the capital religion of an ancient Iraq. That hadn't been changed no matter who was ruling, the Akkadian, the Babylonian, the Assyrian. It was a sacred place that no one can touch, and it was a religion capital, like for, let's say, for the Christian people, for the Muslim, the holy place for the Muslim people. So it was Nippur, it was the holy religion uh, capital of the ancient Iraq, and it got the points, and it had been excavated in the 80s, I think 18 or something like that, by the American from Pennsylvania University, I think. And also because of the wartime, so everything was stopped. I think they also discovered the old library in Naples, the oldest library in the history. They discovered the Nippur, and after that they discovered like different excavations. So they discovered Nepal library in the north, but this one is older and it contains so many impressive information about how you can use planet for curing this disease. So they contain so many instructions about how life, and they also found that there were so many games that so many people they were playing like wrestling stuff. That's all I can find now in my mind. But as I said, it's important because it's the capital, the religion capital of the ancient Iraq, and it survived all the empire that ruled Iraq in the old times. And also, as I said, they found the oldest library in the Quran of Nippur, which is place of the god of Enlil.
And this is your expertise because you are working in Nippur, right? Or not exactly?
I didn't work excavate in Nippur.
Okay.
But because I'm an employee in the state board of heritage, so we have to check Nippur once in a while, and it's our job. We had been visiting Nippur a lot, and every time we visit Nippur, I love.
What is your personal wish? What would you be interested to excavate, or what project you would do if you could choose? And they don't. Do you have something like that?
Okay. All the excavation are nice. I love to do excavation. As I said, no matter how hard work it is, but when you see the result in the final days, you'll be so happy. But the archaeological dreams, for me, I don't know. For me, I just need to stay alive until they discover the capital of the Akkadian Empire, because it's still hidden yet. No one knows where it is exactly. So I don't need to excavate it. I just need to live long to see it. That's it.
Do you think you will hear about that in your lifetime?
I hope. Like if I didn't have an accident in 5 years, 10 years, if I stayed alive, I hope. Otherwise, I'll be happy to do any excavation that I'll be invited in. But
despite difficult circumstances, which we don't really think about, but you mentioned more times, and I want to hear a little bit more about it. Why is it so hard? What is the most difficult part?
Okay, first of all, I mean, excavation in the Middle East is not a good idea because it's too hot to excavate in the Middle East. That's something you have to put in mind if you are like coming from another place. We have so many people who came from Germany, Italy, they passed out. They had sickness because they couldn't resist the heat. Yeah, that's normal. I would be surprised if I had an excavation with people who came from Europe and none of them passed out. Like all of them survived. I'll be surprised. When it's normal, people have been living in a different environment, and they come like in a 48 degree, even 50 degrees sometimes, and you are in the desert, so there is no shadow at all. There is no escape. You just need to take an egg and a bottle of water with you, and no, no, may not mention like you have to wake up at 5 to prepare everything, put your clothes on, prepare your equipment for the excavation, then you'll get into the car, drive for maybe 1.5 hours because 90% of the archaeological sites they located in the desert. So you have to get out of the city. So you have to drive. And because you are staying there for 10, 15 hours, you can't take everything with you. It's almost impossible. Even if you took, I don't think any kind of food would survive like 48 degree of heat in the desert with the sandstorm. I mean, I'm getting used to it and I love it. I don't know why. It's hard work, but we loved it. And I think it's because of the results that we have. So we appreciate what you have. But it is hard because you have to sleep early because you to work about 5, 4:30 sometimes, 5:30, and maximum 5:30, let's say, and take a small bite of whatever you can find and a cup of tea. Then you have to put your excavation clothes, and the equipment with you, the trowel, the brush, and everything you need. You have to drive for 1 or 1.5 hours, depends how far is the site from the city, because almost all of the sites are in the desert. Eggs boiled and piece of bread with you, because that's I mean, this is the only thing that would survive in the desert, like, because it's 48 degrees. mm, you have nothing, just the sand, the sun, the sky. And that's why we lose so much weight when we finish the excavation season, which is also good. You don't need to do a diet. You just need to go in excavation season, eat one egg every day, and then you'll do your hard work, try to get what you get, and then document everything. Take a small break at 10, 10:30 maybe, to eat your egg with a piece of bread, cup of tea. After half an hour, you need to come back to the site, walk for another like 3, 4 hours. It depends. As I said, some excavation seasons we needed to stay until 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and some of them like finished at 2 or at 1. So it depends. Each school has its own rules, its own instruction, and you have to follow what with whom school you are escalating with. Eventually, when you are going back home, driving for another 1.5 hour, uh, sometimes if the cooker is good, you'll find a good lunch waiting for you. Sometimes even the lunch that you have been waiting for, it will be not a good lunch. So it's also a tragedy that you have to deal with. But we are archaeologists. This is our life. We live in the desert. We sleep in the desert. We eat in the desert. We excavate. We work. Our work is to be in the desert. And I think maybe after a few years, we won't like the city anymore. We will be like nomadic people. We will love to live in the desert.
I understand why you said that there is always somebody who just can't stand it. It sounds extremely tough. Like it sounds that you need a physical training to be able to work, just to not only exist. And in other countries, they survive in the AC, in the shopping malls, the offices, the cars. But you are on the field the whole time.
You have nothing, as I said, just the sun, bottle of water, and the sandstorm. It's like as usual. It will be tough for the first couple of days, but then you'll get used to it, and then your skin start to turn black. You'll be like 10 years older, weight, and you'll like you'll turn to a different person. Like there's an update.
Well, it only works if you are really motivated. As you said, you always wanted to be an archaeologist. I think you will be because it's your passion.
Of course, and the best time for me.
And this is what I felt when we met. It's much more interesting than I have ever thought. And it sounds like a very lonely work, but in the end, it's a teamwork.
No,
it's very hard.
Yeah.
And I understand when you rebuild from the pieces, you discover the history of the past. Then for that, it was worth all the efforts. Like, and
of course, yeah. And it's not lonely at all. It's teamwork, as you said, and it's like especially when you work like with a different background people. It's not about excavations. You will meet people from like a different places, from different countries. You'll get to know them. You'll make friends with them, and it's also nice. And that's something keep you also motivated. You need to do good. You need to improve yourself, and also you need to like these people are useful. You need to get advantage of that. To have as information as you can from them, especially if they were professor, and that's something nice. And yeah, and also like now, me and my colleagues prefer like to be in the desert in the summer while it's so hot. We prefer to be there doing excavation better than we just sit in our offices waiting for some kind of paperwork to do. We don't like this. I don't know why we get addicted to excavation.
So after you finish your studies abroad, then you plan to come back to Iraq and you continue working on projects, whatever comes.
Of course, all time approval from my Ministry of Cultural Heritage in Baghdad. They gave me approval for a study for 3 years in Italy, and then when I'm finished, I'll come back to my old job, and hopefully I can get my PhD like maybe. We will see. I hope. Okay. If I didn't have any kind of breakdown in Italy, like if I didn't have any homesick.
Well, thank you very much. It was very nice to talk to you, and I wish all the best for your project abroad and at home as well. And I hope this helps also to motivate people to deal with, to get interested in Iraqi history, and there will be more who will study archaeology. And
thank you so much. I really appreciate what you are doing, Agnes, and like just trying to let people knows about Iraq, and like Iraq is not only war. Like there's a normal life in Iraq, and when it comes to heritage, as we said, it's a cradle of civilization, and it needed to get more attention, and especially from the UNESCO, from the United Nations, they need to work harder in Iraq. Even like I think you saw the stories now about the marshlands, and get right because the dams that have been already created in Turkey and Iran, no one does anything, and that needs to be fixed. And I think this is one of the responsibilities that you are taking, and you are taking nothing in return. So thank you so much. That's very generous. You are such a nice person. I'm so glad that I met you, and I'm so happy that I'm doing this. And I wish you all the best for your new project. And also, I think like this is a formal invitation. If you would like to live this excavation experience, I believe I can make this work. We can if you'd like to, you can text me, and when we have an excavation season, you can come as a reporter, as a journalist, as a trainer. You can do your report. You can do whatever. You can live the experience.
Thank you. I will think about after what you told about the 50 degrees and the piece of egg. I will consider.
Stay at home. Yeah, work on the computer. Don't go to the site. That's easier for you.
Thank you very much again.
You are so welcome, Agnes. I'm so happy to do this. Thank you so much, and have a nice day and good luck.
Thank you.